How's it going, everyone? This is a new thing for me. I'm going to be hosting today's podcast. Who is joining me on this lovely podcast?
Mike.
And Nick.
Okay, welcome. So today we are going to be discussing what makes a horror game actually scary and good. Because, you know, it's October and we've been doing everything horror, so we might as well keep the streak going. Does anyone want to say anything to start us off?
Hey, Mike.
Yes, sir?
Got a question for you.
Oh, no.
What do you think's a better horror game, Resident Evil 5 or Resident Evil 7?
Oh, my God. Is that a real question?
I know, right? It's a crazy question, right?
Well, this actually kind of brings me to what I wanted to introduce this whole conversation with, and that is, when we talk about what a horror game is, I don't know if this is going up before the bracket or after the bracket, but regardless, one of the topics that we discussed in the bracket is, can a horror game also be like an action game, right? Can something that's very heavily based on combat be a horror game? So, you know, I know it sounds like I'm drifting from next question, but to circle back to that, Resident Evil, for all intents and purposes, is my favorite horror franchise ever. I think they nailed so many things right in the first few games and in the most recent release. There were a couple games in the middle that really drifted from what horror games are. I think that's going to be partially what the talk of today is going to be about. And that is, if you have like pretty much unlimited ammo and there are mobs coming at you and you're just bullet spraying tons and tons of enemies, I don't know if that could ever work for a horror game. So Resident Evil 5, as much of a joke question as Nick was asking, is one of the most infuriating things to me in terms of a horror game. It was no longer survival horror. That game was just a third-person shooter. It was an over-the-camera shooter. Man. Yeah, it basically was. It was more like Gears of War, I guess, with the third person, but regardless.
Yeah, that's good.
Resident Evil 5 and 6 were just games where a lot of zombies came at you and you just shot them all. And that was totally the opposite of what Resident Evil is supposed to be. They were so disappointing to me. Resident Evil 4 is a great horror game also. But even with that game, it was hard because that game also had a lot of mobs coming at you. And it's really hard for me to call those games like true horror games because you don't get intimidated or scared in any way. And I guess that goes, my definition of what makes a game scary always has to be feeling like you don't know what you're supposed to do, right? Whether you have ammo or whether you don't have ammo, you're not sure what you're supposed to do with whatever you have, right? Yeah. 4, 5, and 6 are not like that. 4, 5, and 6 are when enemies come, bullet spray. And so I think that's why those games will always be the black sheeps. And I feel weird. People are going to hate me for saying Resident Evil 4 is not a great horror game. It's a fantastic game. I just can't call it a great horror game. I'll call it a fantastic shooter, but that's all I can give that one.
I agree with that. I think one of the biggest things, and this is one of the points of contention that I think might happen, especially when discussing horror games in general, is you need to have some kind of resource management in there. And I don't really think that when you have like an action game like that, you're not really conserving resources or anything. I'm not saying every game has to have limited resources because, again, we don't know when it's being posted. But one of the games that we're discussing is Bloodborne. And Bloodborne, yeah, I guess technically you have limited resources, which I guess with potions and whatnot, and how you're going to be approaching combat. But you have to have resource management of some kind to still get the reaction out of the player that you're looking for, that you would expect with a horror game. And most of the time it's either going to be terror, it's going to be fear, it's going to evoke some physical reaction out of you. But that's really what you're looking for. And when you're not really having that resource management, which I guess, Mike, before I go further on this, from the gameplay I've seen of you guys playing Resident Evil 5, you never really had to worry about your ammo. Is that correct?
Not until the very last boss fight, which was the most stupid thing in any game ever, is you're totally fine on ammo the whole way through. You get to the last boss and you realize, oh my gosh, for some reason I'm like have no ammo left. So that's just horrible game design. But yes, other than that stupid situation, you're never concerned about ammo. The game throws ammo constantly at you, and you have like 6 different guns at your disposal in that game.
Okay, so I think that will confirm my point then about you got to have some kind of resource management, because that helps bring out that the feeling that you're talking about, that feeling of, okay, I don't know what to do next. And when you start questioning yourself, when you start to get scared, and when you start to make those knee-jerk reactions of something jumps out at you and you just start shooting at a wall, that's what I feel like a horror game's real strength is when it can force you to it pushes you back against a wall and will make you have that fight or flight response. And I don't think a game that gives you unlimited ammo or something like that is really treated in the same vein. I still think there can be a great game that can be themed around that can still be considered in the horror genre without being like that. But I do think resource management is very huge when you have to consider what makes a horror game good.
And that actually just gave me a thought, because I was thinking, I've always believed that, right? Resource management's always what makes a scary game for me. But I was just thinking, well, Travis's favorite games, Outlast and Amnesia, I was thinking for a long time now, not just today, those games don't have any resource management. And then it kind of just clicked in my head that they do.
Batteries the
battery,
potions,
and then this
using your oil, and because I also agree with the resource management, because I like to feel helpless. That's what makes me start to get scared and, like, oh my gosh, what should I do? Because, like, the resources play into that. Like, Resident Evil gives me a gun, so it's like, oh, I don't feel as helpless as I just have a camera. But then it's like, oh, but I only have 3 shotgun bullets, so do I even want to even try to use it, or do I just kind of try and run away anyway? And then for like games like Outlast, with the whole should I use a battery, in the easiest mode, you can find batteries, left and right, and it's not an issue. But when you play on the hardest difficulty, when you only have like, I think it's a maximum of 3 in stock, there's going to be areas that you're probably going to be in just pitch black for a while. So, yeah.
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
One of the things that I was also going to say that is very important that I want to touch on is the lighting. I think lighting, while it's crucial in so many other games, I think lighting is especially important in a horror game because it's also limiting what you see. And I think that's really important to touch on because a lot of the times, like, well, first of all, lighting's definitely going to affect, like, if you're going to be scared on a jump scare. If you see something pop out of a wall, but you're shining, like, the light in Outlast right there, you know it's coming, you see it happening, and it's going to be like, all right, well, I already know that this wall looks suspicious in that vein. I don't feel like games that just have it dark all the time, and maybe have like a lightning flash outside the window, necessarily do it well. I think you still got to give them a little more information to let them try to think out a solution, or like to think out, like, is something going to come every now and then. It's got to put it so you can't just run through, obviously, because it's not just dark, because, okay, something's dark, if I hear a noise, it's going to scare me. It's kind of a scattered point, but I do think lighting is pretty important when you're going to be talking about horror games.
Yeah, I think one of the games that I feel like really did lighting well, too, now that I think about it, was Outlast 2. I loved the night vision in that game, because even when you turn night vision on, and obviously the purpose of night vision is to help you see at night, it didn't make things perfectly clear. Because with night vision, you still have some lights outside that, obviously, if you shine night vision when there's some lights outside, you get this horrible glare look. And that happens in the game. What ends up happening is you get this glare in night vision, so you can see better, but you still can't always see exactly what's going on. And so Outlast 2 does a great job using its lighting to always leave you just a little bit in the dark, to always leave you with just a little less information than what you want, which is all it takes for you to be completely freaked out. You can see Martha coming at you, but with the weird lighting, it's kind of hard to tell, well, is she like 5 feet away from me? Is she 10 feet away from me? How close? There's just little tidbits of information like that you don't have, but sometimes that's the whole difference, right? Knowing if she's going to hit you in 1 second or 3 seconds completely changes how you feel about the situation. And so I think Outlast 2, half of the fear came with night vision not being perfect. And I love games like that where it's easy to complain that, oh, why couldn't night vision just look a little more clear? But I think that's what horror games are supposed to be like. They're not supposed to make things easy for you. They give you night vision to help you see in the dark, but then there's a cost of using night vision too, and that's the intense glare that would sometimes show up on enemies. So, I don't know.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I'm also curious what you think about, I know we're going to be talking about enemy designs later on, but I'm wondering what you think about in terms of how it makes a setting. I mean, most of the time you see, I remember seeing in Resident Evil 7 where a lot of the setting has like candles, it has skulls, it has it does a little bit more to try to get you into the atmosphere of the game. So you're not just thinking of, or you're not just thinking of it as, okay, there's you're not thinking of it as like a generic horror staples that you might see in a movie. You're thinking more about it of, okay, becoming more absorbed into this environment. I'm getting more immersed, and I think that just deepens first of all, the excitement that you get when something jumps out at you, but also pushes you again. I like using the metaphor of like pushing your back against the wall when you're almost all out of options, because I think that's what horror games do really well that other games don't really want you to do. They want to give you the resource. They want you to have a way to fight the enemy in front of you. Horror games don't really do that. They want you to have the option of running away at certain points. They want you to have the opportunity of possibly you have this person as a persistent threat throughout the game, but not always that they're the person who's trying to take you out in the end. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think with horror games, it's not even so much that they're not giving you the resources. It's almost more that they're leaving you in a situation where you don't know if you have the resources, whereas most of the time you do, right? And I think the biggest reason that I prefer Resident Evil type horror games over Outlast horror games, which has always kind of been the conflict of interest between me and Travis there, is that with Outlast, you know what you're supposed to do. When, the bad guy shows up, hey, you need to run, right? There's fear in that I gotta book it away from this guy. I think it adds another dimension when you have that weapon because of what you said, essentially, is you're playing a horror game, you're about to go in a boss fight, you don't even know if you have enough ammo going into it. When you load up in Call of Duty and you start the next mission, you know you're going to have enough ammo to take on whatever's coming at you. But you don't have that reassurance in horror games, even though horror games good horror games, I should say, do a wonderful job of giving you enough of whatever you need, even if you don't realize it. I don't know how many times I went into Resident Evil boss fights thinking, oh, there's no way I'm going to have enough ammo to take this guy down. That happens quite a lot, actually, in Resident Evil 7, where you go in with, 6 bullets, and you're like, dude, this guy's going to destroy me. And then you realize, well, as you attack him, there's little crates around that you can open, and you can get a little bit of ammo, or maybe there's places where you can retreat and go back to find other, supplies that you need. So these games do a great job of giving you just enough supplies. I think one of my favorite examples of this, when you fight, I cannot remember her name for the life of me, the old lady from Resident Evil 7. Do you remember her name, Travis?
Eve?
No, Eve was the little girl.
Oh,
I can't remember her name, but if we remember, we'll say it. But the boss fight with her, what my belief is, and I could be wrong, the ammo scattered throughout the boss arena is equal to the exact amount of bullets that you need to take her down. So the game is giving you enough to defeat her, but it doesn't feel like it is. And so I think that's what's the fun of, going back to resource management at the beginning, is it's the fear of not having what you need, even though the game is always going to give you what you need, if that makes sense.
Yeah, we know we talked about a little bit how the game, it still guides you and it still kind of chooses the path where technically you're thinking to yourself like, oh, I don't know if this is the right way or not, or if this is what I'm supposed to be doing. But you kind of ignore that because most well-designed horror games are still leading you down that path without you really knowing it. I think there was a point that we actually brought up in Outlast when we was talking about our main bracket where you don't really, sometimes there's times where you're just like, I don't know if this is the right way, but the game does a really good job of just keeping you progressing, even though it seems like you're wandering helplessly. It's still always pushing you towards that next point, whether you know it or not. I think that's what good horror games do. You still have that progression as well. So, if we're done with this, we got ready to jump in and talk about some enemies. Okay. All right, Travis, what do you like about some enemy designs in Resident Evil? Well, maybe not Resident Evil. What's another? Outlast. What about Outlast? I remember they had some pretty cool enemies.
Yeah, they have. Let's see. They have the Wall Rider, who's basically a ghost. So that one's interesting because you can't always see him. So I enjoyed that because it's like...
He had a cool end sequence, too.
Yeah. There was Christopher, who was a big fatty, who would just rip you in half and rip your intestines out. He's a nice guy. There's the baseball bat guy. Because what's interesting with, Outlast is Christopher was pretty much the main one who chased you in the first one. And then there was the baseball bat guy when you were downstairs trying to get the power back on. And then the doctor, I think, was the most messed up one. He was so creepy and, with his freaking knife scissors that he had, and he stored it in the urinal.
Sounds sanitary.
I mean, he's a doctor. He knows what he's doing.
Of course.
But like
He's at the asylum.
Yeah, because I like them because they still have a very human-esque form to them, but like, I mean, especially the doctor, we don't know what the hell happened to him, but he was like, I mean, he basically looks like a burn victim for the most part. Wouldn't you say, Mike?
Yeah. No, he definitely looks that way.
Yeah. But, like, they didn't go, like, too over the top. Because, like, sometimes I feel like enemy designs can almost be, like, too much. To the point where I'm like, I'm not even processing if it's scary anymore. Because I'm just trying to, like, focus on what I'm actually being presented. I'm trying to think of a good example of it. But, if I can think of one. But, like, sometimes if they're, like, going too gory, too abstract, it just doesn't quite do it for me. And then there's, like, things like Resident Evil where, you know, it's pretty much just zombies. So it's not like a, you know, game-changing type enemy designs. But then the bosses is when they get really unique.
Yeah,
so I might say something stupid here, and that might be if it's stupid, please correct me right away. But do you think that it's actually a good? Because I think this is what I'm kind of grabbing for what Travis is saying. I think it's good to have regular enemies to be more simplistic, but still to have some of the features that make you scared of them. And the bosses is where you can be a little more complicated because you're spending more time with the bosses theoretically. But the main enemies, I feel like if they're too complicated, it kind of takes away from the horror experience. Do you think so? I don't know if that's a dumb question or not.
I think I would agree to that. That if it's just a basic enemy, it shouldn't be anything like too crazy. Otherwise, it's just kind of like, why is this enemy so different from the other one when they literally interact the exact same?
But I would also extend that to bosses depending on the game. For a game like Bloodborne, be as crazy as you want with the bosses because that's the nature of the game.
Right.
For Resident Evil 7, if you had a boss fight that looked like the creatures from Bloodborne, I think it would still be a turnoff to me. In fact, the final boss of Resident Evil 7, I did not like it in any way. I thought it was one of the worst boss fights I've had.
Super weird fight.
Yeah, and because it was essentially just, you know, and for spoilers, I won't say the character's name, but one of the characters starts to mutate, and as a result of it, she just grows larger and larger, and eventually she's the entire house, and like, there's just mold just flying out of the roof, and she's like this ginormous monster-looking thing, and it's not even scary. At this point, it's like, okay, this is a little odd, right? And it felt like it broke away from what the entire game was, which was a little disappointing to me. Resident Evil boss fights usually are actually pretty small people. Resident Evil 5's boss fight was against someone that was the same size as your character. The second half of it, he was a little bit bigger, but not too much bigger. Resident Evil 1, it was just a zombie that was a little taller than the other. So even in those games, boss fights aren't that much different than normal enemies. So Resident Evil 7 really kind of threw me for a loop with its just really awkward final boss fight.
Yeah, I think I remember seeing you talk about that at some point. I was like, it doesn't look... It just looks weird. I don't want to say like... I don't know if it was really that scary to me. I just thought it was kind of like, that's odd. And I guess once you kind of reach into that level of obscurity, you're not actually scaring the person, you're just kind of confusing them. And I think that confusion is what happens when you go a little too overboard.
Right. No, I like keeping it simple. There's a horror game called Forbidden Siren. I don't know if you've heard of it.
Never heard of it.
This is, I think, it has one of the coolest stories of any horror game that I've ever played. I've never actually beaten it. It's very disturbing, but it's one of the games I've always meant to go back to and beat. The main enemies of this game are people. They're just normal people. What ends up happening in this game, and I'll kind of lay the basics down for it, there's something called blood rain, or I think it's called like red water, something like that. And if you come into contact with it, you die and you're reborn, but instead of being you're not so much a zombie, because the people that are reborn still have some intelligence, they still have some of their intact personality, but they're essentially just killers, right? The blood rain sort of controls their mind and forces them into killing. They look like normal people that are just completely demented, right? Like something is just completely off with them. Usually they have like just a little bit of blood like coming off their eyes. They look a little bit messed up, but other than that, they're humans. And that's what was so creepy about it to me in that game, is that they're just humans that are just, their minds are gone and there's something else now. And I think that's what made those enemies especially disturbing to me, is that they were simple. It was just a human NPC model with a little bit of blood and a lot of insanity. And sometimes I think that's really all you need in these types of horror games.
Oh, I would agree.
Yeah, because I found the enemies in Siren far more disturbing than anything I ever saw in Bloodborne. Because as creepy as Bloodborne is, I'm not worried about seeing any of that stuff in real life. You know what I mean? The way enemies look in Siren, Forbidden Siren, it's not that would ever happen. We're not going to start seeing blood rain from the sky and morph people, but the way they look in the game, it's not hard to imagine a human looking like that in real life. And I think that's why that game was so especially disturbing.
Yeah. No, I would definitely agree with that.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. I think there's one more like one thing that also makes a horror game just truly better, and that's just the soundtrack.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah, that's true.
That's
true. The sound design is crazy important.
Because you have to have like that creepy atmosphere, and then once you hear like the chasing music go on, you're shitting your pants, and you're like, where is it? What sees me? Am I already screwed?
Right. Well, and I think one of the things, and we talked about this in the bracket a little bit, but I do want to bring it up again because I think Silent Hill 2 did it better than any game I've ever seen in terms of there's no soundtrack that plays when an enemy is nearby. You just have white noise, right? And it's that static noise that starts to get progressively louder as they get closer. So you don't even get like the scary music that comes on that just gets you to running. You just start getting this really disturbing noise, and it goes well. The enemies in Silent Hill 2 are very tame, right? They're not sprinting after you, trying to chop you up. They're very slow, most of them are. They just kind of creepily walk at you and then stab you. So the white noise works because it's a very small thing that's just very unsettling. And what ends up happening is you hear it a lot. That white noise is you probably hear it more than you don't hear it. And so it's constantly leaving your mind in a state of just like, oh my God, I want this noise to stop. You're in a hallway, you don't see anything around you, but you hear white noise. So you know something's nearby, but you just have to go on business as usual. It is the most uncomfortable thing I have ever done in a game, where you just have to search a room hearing white noise, knowing there's something just casually walking up trying to stab you. Like it's awful. It's a horrible feeling. You want the noise to stop, but you don't know how to make it stop. And so going off the sound design, any other noise would not have worked as well. I think Silent Hill 2 picked the perfect noise for that, to just leave you feeling so disturbed and stressed out. And I think games that have that are really good. On the flip side of that, Resident Evil, the save room theme is it gives you a lot of relief. It gives you this moment of peace, which I really enjoy too. Sort of saying, hey, this is your time to just kind of relax, right? Mm-hmm. That you step away from the world. And so just, not that I have a lot to say on that, but I want to just give a shout out to that piece. I love a game that's so dark and stressful and terrifying that it has this piece that's very relaxing. And I really enjoyed that that Resident Evil was able to implement that into their game. So sound design is very important.
I think also just the little minute details that you can think about, like when you're walking on like a wooden floor, like the floor like creaks and stuff like that. Yeah. And I think those like little details can just ultimately enhance the experience. But my gosh, they can. I mean, it's not like a make or break thing. It just, you can tell when that added detail's there because, or maybe sometimes you don't feel the detail there because you're just more immersed in the game. I don't know. It's very difficult because, I mean, again, I'm not a horror game expert at all, but I know what scares me, and if I'm walking through like an abandoned hospital, the floor is creaking, and I hear something break in the distance, I know that I'm about to shit my pants.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's exactly what horror games have to have, right? If you don't have those like periodic noises or creaking sounds, you're not going to feel that unsettling feeling that you need in some of these games. So I think it's vital to have that.
I would agree. All right.
Okay, is there anything else that someone wants to present?
I think I've said my piece.
Okay.
Same.
Well, that is what we all believe are what makes a good horror game. Please let us know in the comments if you think that we missed a big subject, because you're probably right. We're not experts.
No, we're experts.
If you have any other podcast ideas, please also let us know in the comments, because we do enjoy these, and we're struggling sometimes to think of new topics. So
No, I have ideas. It's just not ones that you guys can really chime in on.
Yeah, we struggle finding topics that all three of us want to talk about is what it is.
There you go.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree with that.
yeah, so if there's something that you would like to hear us discuss, please let us know. And we'll see you guys in the next one.
Yeah.
Bye.
Adios.